Well, hello and welcome to the Profit Express. I'm Tim Healy, and I'm inviting you to join me each and every Wednesday so you can be prepared to win the battle for business. Now, hey, I know you're out there. You're closing deals, you're making money, you're turning prospects into profits. So I've got to make it worth your while. That's why I have on the kind of guests that you can listen, learn, and earn from. Today's guest, no exception. So, as always, thanks for being on board and sharing some of your time with me today. So, if you are still using interruptive marketing strategies and techniques, I'm telling you to please stop. And you think, well, what do you mean, Tim? Well, let's face it, nobody likes interruptive marketing strategies and techniques. You don't like them. I don't like them. More importantly, your prospects and customers don't like them. And do they create results still to this day? Of course they do. They can get you leads, they can get you sales. But it's really the quality of the leads and the quality of the sales. It's more of a transactional interaction. If you're still engaging in the interruptive marketing space strategy techniques, you're not creating an opportunity to connect with your prospects and your customers in a meaningful and emotional way. And if you don't do that, you're guaranteed not to create long-term relationships. And if you don't have long-term relationships, you don't make that emotional connection and offer value to your prospects and your customers, you're not going to have the chance to create brand evangelists. And everybody would love to have an army of brand evangelists. So you're thinking, okay, Tim, you have my attention. So, yes, I'm still using those techniques. So how do I create a situation? How do I create marketing to get me brand evangelists? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's why we have on today's guest. He is Jeff Rosenblum. He is the author of a fantastic book. I got it on the screen here, a screenshot called Exponential. And it's transforming your brand by empowering instead of interrupting. And not only is he the author, he's also the co-founder of Questus, which is a digital advertising agency. And I got to be honest, I'm about halfway through the book. I think page 106. And it's from my perspective, it's a must-read if you're in charge of the marketing for your company, if you're a marketing manager. It's a book that you want to have on your business bookshelf. So it's a great pleasure to welcome aboard the Profit Express, Jeff Rosenblum. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely. It's an amazing book in the sense that, and you say it numerous times, and we're going to get into it, but it's shocking how so many, not just small businesses, but big brands, big agencies still are holding on to the interruptive marketing despite its limitations. So, very excited to have you on. I know you got a lot of great things to share today. So, I want to start with a quote. In the book, you said, and I quote, brands stand naked in front of customers, and they are now defined by behavior, not their messaging. So here's the question, Jeff. Why is this so critical for small businesses to understand and embrace?
Yeah, well, digital changed everything, right? It
Sure.
fundamentally changed the relationship that human beings have with other human beings, and it fundamentally changed the relationship that human beings have with brands. And we call it being naked because the business world talks about transparency. And what they mean really in the world of transparency is we need to embrace transparency. But the truth is, you don't even need to embrace it. You're transparent. It doesn't matter what you say, if you're big enough to have a TV campaign or a radio campaign or a print campaign or a social campaign or a banner campaign or a Google campaign, it doesn't matter what you say. People will see right through those messages and they'll know the truth and they'll know it in real time because ratings and reviews and conversations with friends in person or on social media, it happens in real time, it happens nonstop. So the key is for brands to focus in on their own value system, their
Mhm.
own behavior, their own world-class products and customer service. And from that, you can still do advertising. And there's nothing wrong with interruptive messaging and advertising. We're just asking it to do too much. So first focus in internally on your
Right.
own positioning, on your own behavior, on your own value system, on the products of what you're delivering, and then focus externally on great messaging.
It's funny you say, everybody hears about transparency nowadays, and it's not like, well, okay, we're going to become transparent. No, no, we already are. that's that's quite an eye opener there for the listeners, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
the only question is, do you want to embrace it?
right, you can't hide from it anymore at this point, for sure. Now, how important is it for a business to realize that the audience is now the one that's in control? And are they embracing it?
Well, it's everything. The audience, your customers are completely in control. And
Mhm.
the good news is a lot of brands just don't understand it, right? You can see it every day when you turn on TV, whether you're watching your favorite drama or your favorite sports event, the NFL playoffs right now, and you see all these brands that are hopelessly addicted to a few things. One of them is they're hopelessly addicted to interruptions, and the second thing is they're hopelessly addicted to superficial messages like I'm going to make you laugh, or I'm going to sing a song, and I'm going to have a funny jingle,
Right.
flow from progressive. Like, how many times have we seen flow from progressive and Jake from Allstate? Like, anybody gives a crap. Nobody gives a crap about these people. The good news is, if you're a small business owner, like, great. Let these big companies continue to do these silly things that nobody cares about. And you can lean into truly providing value in doing something that your audience really does care about.
Okay, you made a very important distinction. Progressive Insurance, they're a behemoth. Jake from State Farm, behemoth. And you said, let them continue to do that silliness. You as a small business can lean in and create that, that authenticity and emotional connection. Because that's at the bottom line, Jeff. Those are the listeners of the Profit Express. It's not Jeep or Coca-Cola or Progressive, it's small businesses, it's restaurants, it's professional service firms. So they can be a part of this conversation as much as any behemoth, correct?
More so, right? I
Really?
think small businesses stand to benefit from these strategies even more so. Or some people ask, what if it's a B2B business instead of
Mm,
a B2C, business to consumer?
sure.
Even more so. The only place that some of this empowerment doesn't completely apply is if you're selling an impulse product, gum, beer, soda.
Mhm.
There's something to be said for a pretty funny 30-second spot if that's what we're talking about. But if you're selling something more meaningful, to your point, a restaurant, professional services, your audience goes on a fairly significant journey before they decide whether they want to buy from you, before they decide whether they want to be loyal to you, before they decide whether they want to recommend you to their friends. That journey could be 13 hours. I mean, the one that's really published right now, and people don't talk about it enough, is the automotive category. People spend
Mm.
13 hours on their journey from the moment they decide to buy a car to the moment they actually purchase it. 13 hours. So, what does like the same 30-second spot 10 times in a row really do? It leaves 12 hours and 55 minutes, right? But if you think of yourself as you run a professional service or you run a restaurant, to your point, same thing. People spend hours deciding, do I want to eat there? Do I want to hire you? So let's create content that actually empowers people. Let's create content that's actually meaningful. We don't have to rely just upon interruptions and superficial messages.
So you talk about the customer journey, and the one in particular that's gotten a lot of attention is, purchasing an automobile. You just mentioned 13 hours, and it's a significant purchase for most people. And in the book, and again, it's the timing is great because this Sunday is Super Bowl Sunday. But in the book, you told a great story, not just from your professional perspective, but also a personal one. And I think it was what, Super Bowl 54, I think, where Jeep had the 60-second spot for the Gladiator, and you were actually in the market at the time. And you talk about how they blew $10 million in 60 seconds. So, what did they get wrong, and how did they even dissuade you personally as a potential customer?
Yeah, so let's go through that story because I don't think you need to be selling cars, Jeeps, or anything even remotely close to that expensive to be able to translate to how what it means for your business. But
Right.
you know, I'm a researcher, and I've been conducting this sort of informal ethnographic research for over a decade now, which is when I go to the Super Bowl and everybody's watching the game, I watch the crowd, right? Whether you're with your family or with friends, you're at a bar, you're at a party, right?
Hmm.
I pay attention to what are people doing. And what's happening is in the advertising industry, it's the most remarkable thing. There's an advertising orgy going on. Like it doesn't happen any other time in the world, which is everybody sits down and watches the ads. I mean, think about 2 weeks ago when you're watching the AFC and NFC divisional playoff games. The worst part of it is the ads. They don't stop the ads. So you're trying
Right.
to avoid
Right.
them. When then the Super Bowl comes around, it's like, oh my God, let's grab some potato chips and chicken wings and a beer. Let's all watch the ads. And everybody thinks, oh my God, this is the greatest moment. But it's not, because what happens is we all watch that first set of ads. And then the second set of ads comes around and we
Right.
kind of watch them, but we're drinking more beer and we're eating more wings. By the third or fourth set of ads, by the second, third, fourth quarter of the game, we're doing other stuff. We're talking with our friends. We're talking with our girlfriends. We're eating more wings. Maybe we actually like the football game. So we're
Right.
barely watching it, right? So the lesson is obviously for your audience, they're not thinking about Super Bowl ads, but are you really creating marketing in a place where people are showing up and paying attention? But for Gladiator, what was interesting is,
Hmm.
I didn't even see the ad, right? It was the Bill Murray ad. But I work in advertising and everyone's continuing the orgy the next week. And they're like, oh my God, this is the greatest ad ever. I can't believe it. And we all saw it on USA Today, or I saw it in Advertising Age. But the truth of the matter is, like, I missed it because I was one of those people that was, I don't know, eating wings or drinking beer. So I go up on YouTube and I watch the ad. It's fine. It's a good ad. I give him credit. It was one of the better ads. But I
Okay.
started running the math. They spent like 10, maybe $15 million on this ad.
Right.
Let's just say it worked. I don't think it's a good investment. Let's just say it is. But what was interesting, I was like, well, what happens now? So I went to the website to get some information. I went up on Car and Driver. I went up on Google. I'm like, holy smokes, dude, there's no good information. They went all in on the ad and left out the entire journey. So they satisfied sort of like the top of the advertising funnel, but
Right.
nothing else. So I was kind of interested, but then I was shot out. Here's the crazy part. I was actually not in the market at the time, but I am now. My buddy just drove up with a Jeep the other day. He's
Right.
like, dude, this is the greatest car ever. I love this thing. So, first of all the advertising in the world didn't do diddly for me, but my buddy's recommendation, brand evangelist, I'm like, oh my God, I trust Mike. Mike loves this Jeep. So I go online, and we all know about the supply chain issues. So
Yeah.
it's hard to get it. But now on Jeep.com, you can put in all the different parameters of the car, the Jeep that you're looking for, right? Color, size of engine, size of wheels, different specs, hardcover, soft cover.
Right.
And the system is like, look, here's all the specs you want. Now we're going to go through our inventory. You tell us how far you're willing to shop, and we're going to find a dealer that has the car that meets your needs
Oh.
because supply chains are an issue. So, what does that do? It shoved me all the way down the funnel from, hey, I'm kind of interested, to like, oh my God, I can actually purchase this thing. The advertising industry is so screwed up that all we think about is that great 30 or 60-second spot where they're wasting money on the Super Bowl while winning awards. Who cares? But
Right.
what really worked is an interactive tool that brought me value, that empowered me, that gave me the information I was looking for so that I could purchase this car and invest my hard-earned dollars. For your listeners, the question is, do you want to invest in some sort of marketing that people are doing their best to ignore and avoid, or can you actually use content and creativity, data and technology that brings value to people? Whether you're running a restaurant, you're selling professional services, we can do a lot more than just a superficial 30-second interruption.
So they put all their creativity, they put all their dollars in making that splash. It gets the accolades, it gets the attention, but correct me if I'm wrong, they don't attach that to the rest of the journey. So it almost just drops off a cliff.
It's exactly right. They did that
Yeah.
at the time. A couple of years later, they seem to be waking up to a better model, but they probably misallocated millions of dollars at the time. And so many brands do that, which goes back to your earlier point. So if you're a small business, let these giant companies continue to make the mistakes that they make that they've been trained to make for 100 years. They went to
Right.
Harvard to learn these mistakes. You're smaller, you're more nimble, you know your customers better than anyone. Go kick the crap out of the big guys because you can think much more through the lens of your audience.
I love it. Jeff, you're getting right down to the listener and the small business owner, which I appreciate. And it is the Profit Express today. Today's guest, Jeff Rosenblum, he's the author of the book Exponential. It's all about transforming your brand by empowering instead of interrupting. He's also the co-founder of Questus digital advertising agency. And let's face it, we're all looking to win the battle for business. And if you're continuing to engage in interruptive marketing and you're not creating a scenario where you can emotionally connect, you're really missing out on a lot. So again, Jeff, thanks for being on board today. Can you, I think it would be interesting for the listeners to get your perspective, just some maybe quick definitions. Can you explain the difference of a transactional brand versus an emotional brand?
Yeah, so that's a fun question. Most brands have a transactional relationship with their audience. And what that means is it's really quite rational. You offer a good product at a fair price, you've got some clever advertising, and when people need your product, they conduct some research and they buy from you. Very few are loyal, very few recommend.
Mm,
Nothing wrong with that. You can have a good brand and you can have a good career through a transactional relationship. But what we really covet are emotional relationships. These are kind of irrational in a lot of ways because then the consumer starts thinking about you as if you're their best friend, right? They ignore the competition. They charge a higher price. They sit around the bars, the restaurants, the campfires. They're up on social media and they're actively proselytizing for your brand. They wear hats and t-shirts, like they turn into walking billboards. This is what we all want. We want
mm,
that crazy, emotional, almost irrational relationship. Now, here's the crazy thing. If you want that irrational relationship, you need to kind of act irrationally yourself, right? It's really rational to have a good 30-second spot advertisement. It's really rational to have a good print ad. It's really rational to say, we're a great company, buy from us.
right.
What's irrational is when you actually create content that's not about you as a brand. It seeks to empower the audience. So for Patagonia, for example, they don't talk about how great their products are. They create content to defend the environment. They're so irrational, they put a message up on their homepage that said, don't buy this jacket, to talk about the negative impact of manufacturing, right? Or Fender guitar, they've got this platform called Fender Play. You can own a Gibson guitar, but you can still use Fender Play to learn how to play guitar, right? There's all these different tools where brands will focus in on how do I bring value to you, regardless of whether or not you're my customer. And through that, I'm empowering you, I'm improving your life one small step at a time, and I'm shifting you from a transactional relationship to an emotional relationship.
So it's almost, I mean, and it takes courage to do that, by the way, because I think whether it's just habit or I think it's what people would think is common sense, would be more of the interruptive style compared to, offering content that just improves lives, but isn't necessarily that transactional sell kind of content, right?
I'm glad you brought that up because this is a really important point. This whole story is not about the death of advertising. That
Mm,
false eulogy has been written before. We
mhm.
still need traditional advertising. We still do need interruptions. We're just asking them to do too much.
Right.
Let's create immersive experiences that empower people, that bring value to people's lives. That's how you create evangelists. But if we don't have awareness for that content and we don't have awareness for our products and we don't actively say, hey, will you buy from me at some point? That's going to be a recipe for financial failure. So it's really about finding a balance. You still need those interruptive techniques. You still need traditional techniques. You still need to be a salesperson, but we want to draft off of something much more powerful than interruptions. We want to draft off of empowerment.
Okay, so a little while ago, you said, "Hey, what we're doing is irrational," and it kind of got me to a portion in the book, certain chapter where you talk about and even the title of the chapter is a little kind of snaps your head back, and you say we're in the business of manipulating brains. Now, just on the surface, that sounds a little, oh, that's maybe underhanded or whatever. But you get into a pretty detailed explanation of how the brain works. Let's get into that a little bit because I think it's important for people to really understand how decisions are made.
Yeah, it does sound a little nefarious to say we're in the business of manipulating human brains, but that's what we do. That's what we do as marketers, and it doesn't need to be nefarious. It can be nothing but positive, right? Everybody wakes up in the morning wanting one thing. They want to be better than they were the day before. It's at
Right.
the heart of the human experience. It's what drives capitalism. So when brands seek to empower, they're drafting off of thousands of years of evolution. There's nothing nefarious about this. It's nothing but positivity. But to answer your question, here's what we need to know. The human brain is a cognitive spam filter. It's exposed to 11 million bits of information every single second,
Oh my
but we
God.
only consciously process 50, 50 out of 11 million. So if your listeners stop for a second and just listen, they'll hear some background noise, the squeaking chair, the sound of their heat or their air conditioning, a car driving by
Right.
outside, a horn honking in the distance. We don't pay attention to that. We filter it all out because we would be completely incapacitated if we focused in on all of that, right? That's just noise. There's so
Right.
much noise out there. So our brain just focusing on signals. So if we want to be effective, we need to figure out how we can be signals, not noise. Going back to what we're talking about, Flo from Progressive, she's noise. Jake from Allstate or whatever, he's noise. Cold calling people all day long, spamming people all day long, that's noise. We need to create magnets over megaphones. We need to create content and information and tools that are so compelling, people go out of their way to participate in it and then share it with others. And when you get people to go to that magnet instead of the megaphone,
Mm.
then you're breaking through that cognitive spam filter. You become part of those 50 conscious bits of information that are processed, not part of the 11 million bits that are filtered out.
The human being is bombarded with 11 million bits. Was it a day that you said or an hour?
Dude, it's every second.
Okay.
That's how
11
that's
million
how
bits
wonderful.
of noise a second. The brain can process 50, so that the cognitive functioning has to filter out, otherwise you go crazy. And I love that because to me, you know, it's a wake-up call to remind us all of the interruptive crap we're throwing at people. Now, let me ask this, because you've mentioned Flo from Progressive. Everybody, in America knows Flo from Progressive, whether you like it or not. So Progressive, maybe they're $1 billion. I don't know who how big they are. I know they're obviously huge, whatever. So if you know this and you've written the book Exponential about this, doesn't Progressive know this?
Great question. Flow from Progressive works because it's progressive. Because they've got so much gosh darn money, they can beat us over the head over and over and over again with flow to just beat progressive into our brains. And if any of your listeners have as much money as progressive, go for it. Create your own version of flow.
Right.
I would like to think that they could spend their money much more wisely. I would never buy from Progressive just because of flow. I'm much less likely to buy from Progressive because of Flow, because I'm a sports fan and Flow interrupts my games over and over again. She's so annoying. It's ridiculous. But the data shows they know it. There are no ding dongs over there. The more money they spend, the more money they spend on Flow, the more money they make. I don't think it's particularly efficient, but they don't need to be efficient. They've got so much money, they can be inefficient, yet still be effective. Small businesses, you got to be a little bit wiser than Flow.
So, like you said, they've got the bags of cash. They're just running the numbers because, like, they're obviously not stupid, right? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Wow, this is fun stuff. Here's something, and maybe I'm getting off topic, but I read it in the book. I just want to talk about it. Maybe just a personal interest thing. So, you started Questus. I don't know exactly when it was. It was you and a partner. And when you first started out, like so many small businesses, it's kind of shoestringing it, and you're trying to create a certain perception. And again, as somebody who's a sales performance coach, this caught my attention in the book. You said, I'm just kind of quoting my notes here. When you first started out and you had a prospect meeting, you had the words Nike, Microsoft, and Apple on a whiteboard so if you're in a kind of conference room, the whiteboard's behind you, you're here, and then the prospect is on the other side. And so they could clearly see Nike, Microsoft, and Apple. And like, what's that? And it's tied to something that you call, it's the idea of social affirmation. Why do brands obsess on how to get that? I thought that was a very interesting story in the book.
Yeah. I'll tell you the story because a lot of the book had this same fabric, which was I really just wanted to talk about a lot of the mistakes I've made over time, or some of the shortcuts I made because I've been doing it for 23 years. We've been really successful. We've got a great team. So I love talking about all the potholes that I've stepped in because I hope the listeners can avoid those potholes, man. I've been
Right.
covered in blood and snot and tears. Like I hope the book educates people how to avoid all that stuff. But what happened is we were a couple of outsiders. Like I was a researcher and a data analyst, and I was pouring over data, and I saw that the world needed a better solution for advertising. And my business partner was like this world-class designer selling stuff to like Johnny Depp had his paintings on the wall. But I was like, dude, we should take your cool creative and my lame data and like combine it into something cool. And he was like what? I'm like, an advertising agency. He's like, have you ever stepped in an advertising agency? I'm like, no, dude, have you? And he's like, no. I'm like, fuck it, let's do it. Let's go start an agency. So the
Right.
point is, we're total outsiders. We're flat broke. We're kids, right? We literally had two desks and one chair. Like we had to trade off. One person sits on the floor, the other person sits on a chair. Our greatest asset was like a pack of Marlboro Reds. It was the last pack we ever enjoyed, and then we moved on. It was like we had nothing, and we didn't know anybody. So we had a whiteboard, and on the whiteboard we wrote Nike, Apple, and Microsoft. Then we wrote like June 24th, July 2nd, and August 3rd, right?
Yep.
We didn't know these people. We didn't know anybody. We didn't know a goddamn thing. And we've now worked with almost every one of the greatest brands in the world: Apple, Amazon, Disney, Capital One, the NFL, ESPN, you name it. They've all been our clients. But then we didn't know anyone. So we would bring them in and we'd sit them down and we'd have the whiteboard behind me. And we'd be chatting about how smart we thought we were and whatnot. And they're kind of listening. But I'd always watch their eyes go up to that board and be like, whoa, dude, these guys are meeting with Nike and Apple and Microsoft. I never said we were meeting with them. I just put their names on the board. Frankly, it was probably, you know, the smartest thing I've ever done, but also pretty deceptive, right? And I'm proud to say 23 years later, like I like to think we're the most honest business in the universe because there's no reason for us to exaggerate. We've got the nice track record. But to your point, it was social affirmation. And what that means is just like consumers, we were talking about it before, just like the 11 million bits of information, we're all looking for shortcuts. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in Blink. Like, how do we know a Mercedes is better than a Toyota? Nobody can look under the hood and really figure that out. No one knows that, right? So what do we look? Well, a Mercedes is 70 grand, a Toyota's 30. The Mercedes is better, right? We're looking for these shortcuts. So we see it in our consumer purchases. We go up on Amazon, and if there's 1,000 5-star reviews, that's a hell of a lot better than 12 3-star reviews, right? Social affirmation. It's really important in B2B. It's really important in like restaurants that you talked about earlier, or your consultative professional services. You need to get those wins, and you need to make sure you make them extremely happy so you get those recommendations. But also, just so people know, like to your point, if you're running a professional services organization, get some big wins under the belt so people know that they can trust you. If you're doing work for Apple or Amazon or Nike or Microsoft, whatever the case may be, they know that you can satisfy their needs for an arguably much smaller organization.
Well, listen, obviously 23 years later, and you guys have done work with the biggest brands in the world. But you have to love a good hustle story when you're starting out, and everybody's got a good hustle story, and I appreciate that one. And you also, it was very interesting. So if I have it right, your dad was a salesman, right?
Yep.
Okay. And he did, I guess, at the kitchen table at dinner time with the family, he did the Coke Pepsi taste tests. And isn't there something very, very interesting? I don't want to blow the details on as to how people, when they like Pepsi versus when they like Coke. Very interesting.
Yeah, so there's two big points in there. So one of them is my background is like I just come from a family of geeks. Like my dad was like a world class athlete. He almost played for the Dodgers, but his father was a monster. He was a gangster. Used to beat him up. I talk about it in the book. So he just really wanted to just be like a square and a family guy. And every night we would run these different experiments. And one of them, in a lot of them, he was actually trying to show us like, dude, don't be fooled by sales and marketing, right? So we did the old school Pepsi challenge, right? Pepsi, Coke, put it in a cup. It also took like generic brands, like the supermarket brand that just says soda on the side, right?
Right.
And his point was like, dude, when you taste these things, you can't really taste the difference in the soda, right? But once we start showing the logos, Coke, Pepsi, like you prefer one versus the other, and you sure as hell prefer them a lot more than the generic brand. And what
Right.
he was trying to tell us was like, don't be fooled by advertising. Don't be fooled by logos. Be a smarter consumer. But literally, I remember being like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 at the table and be like, oh man, this is cool. Like, your lesson's backfiring, dad. Like, I want in on this. Like, whoever's figuring out the value in that Coke or Pepsi, like, I wasn't using that terminology, but I was like,
Right.
that's freaking cool. I want in on that, man. And my mom was like a shrink, a therapist. Like, she was all about like understanding the human brain. So we would geek out at the dinner table every night talking about this stuff. And that's what sent me down the world of advertising. Like, I fell in love with it. But the other lesson in there that you're bringing up is your brand is your most valuable asset in the world. They
Hmm.
call it the Pepsi paradox in research. And what that means is most people prefer the taste of Pepsi over Coke. It's straightforward, it's sweeter. So if you just taste it, the majority of people prefer Pepsi. But once you show the logo, the majority of people prefer Coke. The
Wow.
Coke brand, according to Kantar, is worth $84 billion. Not the revenue, just the logo. $84 billion, which I think is 7 times as valuable as Pepsi. Why? Because it manipulates your brain. You think that soda tastes better when you see the Coke label. When you take the labels away, you actually prefer the Pepsi product.
So then the lesson, if I'm going to oversimplify it, Coke just did a much better job of creating a brand that people want to be a part of than Pepsi.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Wow. There is, man, there's so much to discuss. I mean, first of all, again, today's guest, Jeff Rosenblum, his book Exponential. Uh, it's a fun book. I love the stories, the analogies, the studies, the research that you share. So for that reason alone, for those listening, make sure it gets a place on your business bookshelf. Number one. So, Jeff, let's wrap it up this way. I mean, you've shared a lot of really, really good things. So you have the person out there who's listening, the listener of the Profit Express, wanting to win the battle for business, and they're out there each and every day. They are the local restaurant, professional service firm. Maybe they're a small distributor or manufacturer. They want to walk away with this conversation that you and I are having, with something that they feel they can start doing themselves tomorrow. They're listening in right now, Jeff. What are you going to share with them?
I'm an advertising guy, but if I were to start my career over and I could find a way to monetize it, I
Hmm.
would be some sort of customer service consultant because the takeaway that I would give is focus in on customer service. You're not going to match, if you're a restaurant, you're not going to match the size and awareness of Olive Garden, right? If you're professional services, you're not going to match the size and trust of McKinsey. If you're a retailer or e-tailer, you're not going to match the capabilities of Amazon. But what you
Right.
can get to know are your customers, and you can treat them with kindness and respect and add value and get to know them on a one-to-one basis. Marketing, technology, advertising, it's increasingly table stakes. And what I've learned is what really
Mm.
leads to brand evangelism is the power of customer service. And if you want to take down the big boys, that's a huge opportunity for you right now.
So while the ability to buy the $10 million ad this Sunday in the Super Bowl is very cost prohibitive for 99% of businesses, customer service is an equalizer, and therefore any small business can have brand evangelists just like the Patagonias can, right?
That's a perfect summary. Absolutely.
Awesome. Jeff, love the book. It was fun, enjoyable to read. I got a heck of a lot out of it. People want to learn more about you, Questus, the book. How can they follow you?
Yeah, sure. So the book's doing great. We just hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. We're really proud of that, but mostly because
Congrats.
we're donating all the profits to charity. So you can find the book on
Ah,
Amazon. Somebody else published a book called Exponential around the same time, but do a search, Exponential by Jeff Rosenblum. Please leave a review because it'll help us raise more money for charity. And if you
yep.
want to learn more about us, the agency is at questus.com, Questus.com. I'm on Instagram at the Jeff Rosenblum, and I'm on Twitter at JR Questus.
Jeff, thanks so much for your time. And before I let you go, just a shout out to the Johnny Cash pillow in your background. Very nice touch. I like that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. And again, thanks so much, Jeff Rosenblum, the author of Exponential, Transform Your Brand by Empowering Instead of Interrupting. And folks, listen, thank you so much for listening each and every week. And great interviews like the one I just had with Jeff Rosenblum are going to download every Wednesday. So make sure you follow the show on Instagram at The Profit Express and on Twitter at Profit_Express. And as always, we have to thank the people who love and support the show, the sponsors, Corbett Public Relations. They've been promoting and protecting businesses and brands for over 30 years. So visit my good friends at CorbettPR.com. That's CorbettPR.com. And until next week, continue going out each and every day, doing one more thing different, better than you did yesterday to win that battle for business. Until next time.